So I just recently watched this anime that was disgustingly mid, but I still felt like I had to talk about it. The anime in question is called Red Data Girl. This show was very weird. I thought it would be good with how it started, but then it kinda just went nowhere, so let's talk about this show and see exactly why it's mid. The one thing that I find to be really disappointing about this anime is that it had a really cool premise. Like, the idea of having this person slowly take over your body and you have no idea for so long, it's a bit terrifying. This story has a lot going on at once, but not enough at the same time. The concept is cool, but that is about it. The execution just isn't there, and that is the most disappointing part about this whole thing. But hey, there are some aspects of this anime that I do really find to be pretty cool. Like for instance, the fact that this show gives off massive shoujo energy, even though it isn't technically a shoujo. But that energy is definitely there. There are the typical emotional beats that we get out of every shoujo series. That is why I say this. The main character is a girl, which is typically the case for most shoujo stories as well, obviously. But honestly, the biggest reason that I say this is because of the vibe. The vibe is just there, and it makes it feel so much like a shoujo story. Not that this is a bad thing, actually I think it's one of the few good things about this anime. Another thing I really liked about this show is that at the beginning especially, it can be quite creepy. There are some moments that are genuinely unnerving, and that is really cool. It lets us know that we should be taking these supernatural things very seriously in this story, as it isn't something that should be easily trifled with. The creepy elements weren't something that I really expected, and that's why I think it worked out so well. The vibe just made it more fun. That is another one of the aspects that I quite liked about this anime. The supernatural stuff is pretty cool. Honestly, none of it is really all that unique from an Asian standpoint, but it's still quite cool. I just like cool supernatural abilities though, so I guess I'm just a little biased. We get to see shikigami, ghosts, gods, possession, summoning, all kinds of other abilities as well. A lot of that stuff appears quite often in the story, which makes sense given the type of story being told here. It's fun to see these abilities pop up when they do for sure. So one of the biggest issues with this story is how the romance forms throughout the show. Like, it's not that great. Miyuki treats Izumiko like nothing but a nuisance throughout pretty much the entire show, and yet somehow you expect me to believe that they like each other in some way. Like, yeah right, not a chance. But it's not just them. There is a pretty weird energy between two of the other characters, Monatsu and Mayura. Their relationship is a bit weird. Do I think it would ever go full-blown romance? No, not really, but considering they are siblings, I'm kind of like, nah bruh, this ain't it. Because it is a little weird how close they seem to be. And I know Grief can do that, but still. Honestly, the romance is one of the weakest aspects of the story, but then again, it isn't really the main focus of the story, so there's that at least. The next thing I really want to talk about in this anime is the fact that it is hard to follow the story sometimes. There are genuine moments where I'm like, just what the hell is going on here, because they do not make it easy to follow. It is not necessarily fast-paced or slow-paced, it is just a very weird pacing. And some of the events are pretty strange, which makes it way harder to actually understand the story. By the end I got it, but when I was watching I was like, what the hell? But I guess since it worked out in the end it wasn't so bad, but it still wasn't something I particularly loved about this story. This definitely made the show a little bit worse in the end. The character writing in Red Data Girl is interesting. Some of the characters are fun and others aren't. Like, for one thing, there aren't even that many characters and yet somehow they failed to make any of them all that interesting. The character development for everyone outside of our main character is non-existent, and you can argue it is the same for her too. Like honestly, this story has failed its characters for the most part. Alright, let's start with Izumiko. What did they do right and what did they do wrong? Well, the start is really interesting. She is this shy girl who is ignorant of the world and has this crazy supernatural ability that she seems to have no control over. This makes for a really fun premise to build a character off of, but unfortunately, her character doesn't really change all that much by the end. She has a little bit more control over her supernatural abilities, and she is a little less ignorant of the world after having finally ventured out of her comfort zone a little bit, but that's about it. Just some small minor changes that don't really affect it all that much. She still feels like her journey is just starting, and that could just be because of the bad pacing of the anime and not necessarily her character. Miyuki is another character who doesn't really change pretty much throughout the entirety of the anime. He is an asshole when he is introduced, and he is an asshole at the end of the anime, although a little less so. He doesn't really grow in ability or personality. The only thing that changes is his relationship with Izumiko, but that's pretty much it. He stays the same throughout, which is pretty much unfortunate because I love characters who go from assholes to lovable characters, but that unfortunately wasn't the case here. So next up is Monatsu and Mayura. They are both very basic, bare bones characters. They each have a small story arc they go through that helps them each feel like a little bit better of a character. They each have a love for each other that is a little weird, but then again, I don't have a twin, so I don't know what it's like, but I'm glad they don't flesh that out too much because that would ruin their characters even more. Neither one of them is all that interesting, and I guess you could just be because of their characters, although I do like how Mayura has helped Izumiko come out of her shell a little bit. That is nice. The other side characters in the show really have nothing going for them. They don't appear all that much, they don't have any significant story arcs, and they also just really aren't all that interesting. Honestly, the characters weren't that bad despite how I made it sound, however they definitely weren't the highlight of this series in any way, shape, or form. So, do I recommend Red Data Girl? Honestly, no. It's something that doesn't really have any substance and is a very forgettable anime. However, it wasn't that bad. It was still entertaining, and the premise was still pretty cool. So honestly, if you want to go ahead and watch it, I don't really think you'll hate it all that much, but just go into it with an open mind. This isn't some masterpiece of an anime. Alright, so that was the video. If you liked it, be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps out a ton. And if you do decide to join the community, then I guess I'll see you next week with another video. Bye.